taking notes, so I'm gonna keep these here because I also have to talk about biology a little bit, so forgive me because I am a trained chemist, so if I get the science of flowers wrong. So let me explain. So I grew up sort of shadowing my mother. And what that means is that she was an avid gardener, so she gave me kind of this space behind our yard, which was filled with dandelions. And for me, this meant I could pick as many as I wanted, I could line up the dandelions, I could make daisy chains, I could do everything I wanted with them. And in fact, I think I got my first bee sting in that amazing space behind our yard. And then I also at the same time was in a Montessori kindergarten at the age of 4. And one of the most amazing things they brought in, which was just wonderful to me as a budding young scientist, is they brought tulips and then food coloring. So the experiment was you put the white tulips into jars filled with water and food coloring, and then we would color on pictures, how the color kind of went up, which is an awesome way to engage kids in graphs, and it's no wonder that I still to this day have a love of math, only shadowed by my love of science. So I have always related to the world around me through flowers and plants. So that's 4-year-old me. Fast forward to me in my early 30s, and I essentially have 2 passions and 2 groups of friends. The first of those are endurance athletes and endurance athlete events. So what this means is that in my spare time, I train to ride 100 miles on my bike or to run 26.2 miles in a marathon. And I pay to do this, and I do this with great passion. And most of my friends I've met through an actual local cancer charity. And so we are people with a ton of energy who spend all of our time training, and in our spare time we raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for cancer research and to help cancer patients and their family and promote education. And I've done this for so long that eventually I became a coach to help other people raise money and ride their bike 100 miles. The second group of friends are teachers, much like Becky that you heard today. And teachers are kind of a unique group of people. So they get locked in rooms for 6 hours a day with teenagers. They talk about things like climate change and evolution and sexual and asexual reproduction, which of course makes a lot of giggles in the room. And these are people who, relatively for having the degrees that they do, make, kind of a low wage and all of these things. And they also are very strong-willed, passionate people. So these 2 groups of people sort of converged on my house one day. At the age of 36, I was diagnosed with rectal cancer, which was kind of a pain in the ass, and I make that joke all the time. I just kind of learned to own that. And so I also really love Halloween, and so annually I would have this pumpkin carving party. And when I said to my friends, because I was diagnosed with cancer about a month before, maybe I should cancel, they said, no, just have it, and we'll show up. We'll all show up. And in fact, what I didn't know was that more people than I had invited showed up. And when I meant showed up at my house, at the time I was newly divorced, and my finances were kind of in that post-divorce apocalyptic, horrible state that happens financially. And then I had this major diagnosis. And I also owned a 100-year-old house that I had no idea how to take care of. So when these teachers and also endurance athletes showed up at my house, they came with things like leaf blowers and shovels, and they packed 40 bags of leaves. They fixed my doorbell. They fixed the windows that I had no idea what to do with, but I knew leaked air all the time in the winters of Chicago. And they did all of these things, again, as a way of showing me, just sort of that they would still be there for me. But the one thing that happened is 2 of my friends used my now functioning doorbell, and they were there and they greeted me with mini little trowels, little shovels and gardening gloves, and they held a brown paper bag filled with tulip bulbs. And they said, where can we plant these? And I get incredibly emotional when I say, they said, by the time that these come up, it will all be over. It will be better. These will come up in the spring. So they planted in the front of my 100-year-old house that I didn't know what to do with, dozens of tulip bulbs. And as I lost my hair and I lost my fertility and I couldn't run and I couldn't bike and I stopped working, I knew that in the spring, eventually spring would come, and of course the tulips would bloom, which they did. And so those blooms kept coming back, and the amazing thing to me about bulbs is that while they're doing this sort of above ground, showy, flashy thing with stems and flowers, I've learned that below ground they're also doing the same thing for the year to come. So a bulb is actually a small stem with some leaves around it with all of the nutrients that you can actually move, and it will bloom in the next year. And then the coolest thing is that bulbs will also go into, reproducing. So they'll make 4 or 5 other new bulbs that again can then go on and become more tulips. And for me, this just was this incredible symbol of hope. I actually at this point am now a 2-time cancer survivor. And I cannot tell you what it meant to just know that my friends gave me this notion that, again, as Pablo Neruda, who's one of my favorite poets of all time, says, that you can cut the flowers, but you cannot keep spring from coming. And that really, when I saw those flowers come up every year, took me back both to my 4-year-old self who had this wonder, and awe of science, and also sort of my 30-year-old self that had this eternal hope that no matter sort of what the fall brought or what happened in winter, that spring would always come.
Yeah!